The federal carbon tax kicks in today for 4 provinces: Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan and New Brunswick. And of course, those are 4 jurisdictions that refuse to apply their own form of carbon pricing acceptable to the federal government. What does it mean, though, for households and businesses? We're joined by Jack Mintz, President's Fellow School of Public Policy at the University of Calgary. Jack, I managed to mangle your title there, but it's great to have you. Thanks very much.
It's my pleasure, mangled title or not.
Thank you. So just remind the viewers of what's happening today. This Justin Trudeau's government has imposed this carbon tax, and of course the number that jumps out is it means 5 cents extra on a litre of gasoline. What should we remember about what's happening today?
Well, anyway, we should remember that the government puts on this tax. It puts a tax on any energy that comes from fossil fuel sources. It's whether it's oil, natural gas, or coal. And that adds on to the energy bill that a household will face. For example, gasoline, 5 cents a litre, but also electricity prices and heating oil and things like that. All that is going to be taxed more. And then, of course, businesses are also going to be taxed. And some will get relief. The big emitters are going to get relief from the tax. But smaller businesses and those that, let's say, are not big emitters but are big businesses, they're going to face higher energy costs, and they have to pass that on in some way as well.
So before we get into the problems you have, the objections or the criticisms you have of this policy, the idea is, in theory, it's going to be revenue neutral and the public will get back money from the government. You've christened them Justin bucks. I love that. Because the government is saying it's not a tax grab. This isn't designed to steer people away from using fossil fuel energy.
Yes, that's correct. And so the money that is going to be raised is going to go back only to households as rebates. There is going to be some money going to municipalities and small businesses as some rebates too. But most businesses that are going to be paying higher energy costs are not going to get any relief at all.
And just before we get into your criticisms, the idea here would be if I'm driving a giant SUV and heating my house to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, I'm going to have to pay more in carbon tax than I get back from the government.
Yes, it all depends. Like people living in rural areas, they have to drive more, so they're likely going to be bigger consumers of energy as a result. Also, people living in older homes that tend not to be as energy efficient may also end up paying more. Taxi cab drivers are going to have to pay a lot more because they tend to be heavy users, unless they go to hybrids and other cars like that. But certainly that will happen.
So before we get going here, you're by no means against a broad-based carbon tax. You think that is a reasonable way to go. You say the federal government's was essentially based on BC's, which was a well-designed tax.
Yes. In fact, what British Columbia did was what I would call the ideal system initially. And that is they brought in their carbon tax and then they cut personal and corporate taxes with it. They didn't give rebates. They did do a little bit of rebates just to get the thing going. They had a 1-year rebate. But they actually cut corporate and personal taxes. And that what many economists will talk about is the double dividend of carbon taxes. Carbon taxes are very efficient because it's a low-cost way of getting businesses to comply. Once they see a higher price, they'll try to figure out new technologies. Governments aren't in the business of picking what those new technologies are.
It's the whole idea kind of thing.
And and that is a real benefit. And also, if you cut corporate and personal taxes, the most harmful taxes in the economy, then you're getting a double dividend by having a better tax system as well. And that's what BC initially did when they brought in the carbon tax, and a lot of economists around the world actually applauded the BC system as being exactly the right way of proceeding with the carbon tax. But that is not really what the federal government is doing. They're providing rebates, which is not improving the tax system. So we're losing that extra dividend. But also, it is a broad-based carbon tax, so I think it is positive from that. But we are not getting rid of all those costly regulations on top of it. In fact, the federal government is bringing in even more subsidies and more regulations on top of a carbon tax. Or let's put it this way: the carbon tax is just being overlaid on top of a whole bevy of regulations and other types of policies that is really are meant to be replaced by the carbon tax, not the carbon tax being an addition to it.
Yes, so because there's a whole panoply of subsidies and regulations out there that they're also going ahead with. And you reckon that the best way to do just a carbon tax, a pure carbon tax, and that would steer the economy effectively.
Right, and I don't think people realize how costly some of these regulations and subsidies are. For example, in the federal budget with the new electric vehicle subsidy,
yes,
it's been estimated based on a couple of different studies, but that's equivalent to a carbon tax of let's say $600. One study even had $800 a ton.
Per ton, yeah.
Yes,
it's
because
a costly way too.
It's a very costly way, because don't forget, you know, the government called them zero emissions cars, which is a bit of a lie, because a car still has to use electricity, even if it's an electric car. And electricity has to come from a source. Now in Canada, a lot of our electricity is hydro, and so in that case, we are not creating more emissions. But in those provinces that have to rely on, let's say, natural gas for electricity.
Or coal in Saskatchewan and Alberta.
Or coal and coal. Coal is becoming much smaller now in Canada. But those that have to rely on natural gas, it's not a zero emission car because it's going to run on electricity.
Another problem you have is that there's various carve-outs for certain groups as well. I think farmers, they always seem to have the ear of politicians. You have reservations there as well.
Well, that's right. I mean, you're giving you're starting a carve-out here and a carve-out there. You'll see down the road, we'll see a few more carve-outs. In fact, some people, and we also have to remember the federal government is picking up a lot of GST revenue and the province's HST revenue. And so there's actually going to be some additional revenue being raised. And so there's pressure to take some of the HST off gasoline and heating oil and things like that because of this.
Jack, we just scraped the surface there, but I think you really helped us through this thing, and I hope you'll come back soon to discuss it further.
Oh, my pleasure.
Jack Mintz joining us there, President's Fellow at the School of Public Policy at the University of Calgary.